Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the League of Women Voters, I want to welcome you and thank you for coming to our program tonight. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government. It does this through education and issues advocacy, increasing understanding. League has local, county, state, and national affiliations and is a trusted grassroots organization. Violence and gun violence has become a major problem in our society. Some of you may think that violence doesn't directly affect you, but it does. Violence has an impact on every institution, every event, every community. The problem is multifaceted, and our speakers tonight will talk to you about the many ways they are tackling these issues. Our first speaker will be Jose Santos Woss, the Director of Justice Reform for FCNL, Friends Committee for National Legislation. FCNL is a nonpartisan Quaker organization that lobbies for values of peace, justice, and environmental stewardship. Jose has been lobbying for dedicated congressional funding for violence interruption programs nationwide. Our second speaker will be Kris Brown, the president of Brady, a national organization that works across Congress, courts, and communities to end gun violence. Kris will speak to specific steps Illinois can take utilizing existing legislation. Our third speaker will be Eric Reinhardt, the state's attorney for Lake County. He will speak about the need for gun violence prevention in Lake County and about the violence interrupter programs he is beginning here. Together, our speakers have had years of studying and working on these issues. They have experience and expertise. They know what they're talking about. Once you have heard them, I think you will find that their core message is, do not give up hope, do not give up. You can have an impact. Oh, and don't forget to vote. I will turn this over now to our MC, Judy Armstrong, who will introduce the speakers and ask the questions following their presentations. She's on mute.
You have to unmute yourself, Judy.
Hello. Linda already did a great introduction of who we have on our panel tonight, and we're thrilled to have all of you with us. Our first speaker will be Kris from the Brady Center.
No, I'm sorry. Jose is going first.
Okay, quick correction. Jose, you're going to be going first, please. Very eager to hear what you have to say.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the organizers of this event who are putting this forward, and this is going to be a very rich discussion of some pretty controversial topics in our country. And some of my remarks will be controversial, but I think as a Black man in America, I have a certain viewpoint, and I have a certain portfolio that involves work on violence in a lot of different ways. And so, second off, actually, let me thank you for joining us. Crime isn't just one person committing an act of violence or breaking a law we as society have deemed punishable. It's much more than that. You are here to learn the real reasons that violence happens so frequently in the United States, and importantly, how we address it. These problems of crime and violence are complicated and require a robust and comprehensive approach to meaningfully solve it. Now, speaking more widely here, I'm addressing crime and violence, not just gun violence, because as I'm addressing them together, the meaningful solutions solve all of these problems. We have more guns in this country, literally, than people. I want to touch on all categories of gun violence. What we most see associated with gun violence are all of these mass shootings we see covered in the news, and to a lesser extent, suicide by gun. Probably the most pervasive but least understood by the wider public, I think, is interpersonal violence or community violence. It's a lot of the violence that was the norm, and I was surrounded by as a kid in the 80s and 90s in New York City. It's also important here to say there's also gun violence that happens at the hands of the police. It's controversial to say this, but police take the lives of 1,000 people every year. Many Americans are essentially shielded from this reality. As a Black man in America, I'm not. These are complex problems that relate to each other. I want to focus my remarks on community violence and, to a lesser extent, police violence. In these communities where I'm focusing on, people lack opportunity and have needs. This all exists in a country where healthcare is a commodity, so many often don't have access to the care that they need. This, importantly, includes mental health care. Black and brown communities deal with generational trauma, literally passed down from one generation to the next. And I don't just mean how you would think in norms and behaviors, but literally in our bodies, in our DNA, we transmit that trauma. This can be traced back to times of slavery. These communities that are so often forgotten and neglected in important funding decisions, not just funding decisions, but importantly, funding decisions made by policymakers in many, many ways that I can easily spend our entire time addressing on this panel. Luckily for you, I will not. Federal funding is its own beast that I'm learning. Everyone's learning that I work with federal funding. We might no longer have redlining in communities of color on the books, but we know that these are communities that have difficulty getting loans to start a business, for example. And I'll add here, there have been small business loans that have carved out people with criminal records. Communities that have been forced to live where there are few economic opportunities in neighborhoods with artificially depressed economies also see homes with no increase in value at the same time that other zip codes saw tremendous wealth generation in largely white communities. I'll add in here that there were racially restricted covenants in certain areas where landlords were prohibited from renting to Black or brown people. So this is literally shutting people out of opportunity. Communities where violence most often happens have been forgotten and have seen underinvestment over generations, literal generations. These are the conditions where income inequality and poverty thrives. Sometimes the drug trade is the best way out of poverty or a rapid way to generate wealth. There's no small claims court for drug transactions. This happens outside of the formal economy. Sadly, violence is often the primary recourse to resolve disputes on the Black market in these same forgotten communities. There's also conflict in these communities, as is the case in any place. This is normal. But the norms in these forgotten communities make violence a viable option. Now, I'm going to jump ahead here, but violence interrupters aren't a panacea for symptoms of the larger US problems of classism and white supremacy. You don't invest in these communities, violence occurs, And then the preferred solution is a containment strategy involving the police, because all of these root causes have translated into crime. It's a sad reality that people who are better off are more content to extend the reach and resources of militarized police rather than expand education, business generation, or establish addiction treatment, among the many other solutions that can meaningfully address these problems that, like I've said, are generations old. And we see this in the funding decisions and the policies that we have till this day that have carried over through generations. It's just the status quo continuing to repeat itself, just in different ways. Sometimes violence falls on these Black and brown communities because of the police. We all have seen the seemingly countless hashtags remembering Black men and women whose lives have been taken by police. So unfortunately, you have violence happening on both sides, in the community against members of the community, and by the police responding to the violence, sometimes with violence. Violence interrupters are a virtuous cycle because they prevent the commission of violence, offer alternatives to all the parties, and avoid involving the police. Furthermore, if you are addressing these problems before they begin, the problem is not only addressed, but you further reduce the footprints of police. Now, let me give you a scenario to think through what I've just said. A disputed drug transaction is resolved between parties with a violence interrupter responding, eliminating those parties becoming violent and potentially avoiding police also responding with violence. It's a powerful salve on a deep wound, saving lives while we work on these comprehensive solutions to crime and violence in a meaningful way. Now, I want to speak to what some might see as a weaker point in my argument, because I'm sure that there are individuals in Congress who would see the work that I'm doing as giving money to criminals, people who are in these communities, serving the communities to try to resolve violence. And also, we unfortunately have this view of people who are justice involved as being separate and apart from us. These are people who have broken the social contract, and we shouldn't be thinking about them in addressing these problems. They just are people who need to be locked up, and the problem is solved. Many people think that way. But I want to share a little bit about credibility that I might have that isn't on FCNL's website, for instance, by focusing on something that my mother used to tell me a lot. In high school, in college, always be careful who you let in your car. And it didn't really click for me until I got to FCNL, why she was so scared of the wrong people getting into my car. I understood it in real terms, but I didn't have the language for it. My mother wasn't an attorney. She's not an attorney. But my mother was terrified of a conspiracy charge. She was terrified of somebody with drugs getting into that car, and then I being found guilty of all the commissions of whatever crime that person coming into my car committed. So me, with my graduate degree, with my career of over a decade in policy, I could have easily been a criminal myself. There isn't such a clear separation between people who commit crimes and people who are just members of the community. And we've criminalized whole populations in this way. And then this is just one way that we've criminalized populations. So these are problems that really affect all of us, and we have to think meaningfully of how we resolve them. And I think the first order of resolution is violence interrupters, to stop the violence from happening. And then while we save those lives, hopefully we can look at some of the root causes and how we as a society address people that we've left behind and also forgotten. Now, what specifically are violence interrupters? Violence interrupters, or credible messengers, as they're sometimes called, identify those most likely to commit violence. They intercede, mentor, teach nonviolence, provide alternate thought processes, and alter the group norms that would sustain or perpetuate violence. At the point of conflict, the violence interrupter will take the parties aside, try to resolve the conflict, as well as share how gun violence would affect the communities and their families. Because sometimes these are individuals who are in a position of anger. They might take that anger out with violence, and they don't understand everything that can come from that. They don't understand coming face to face with a prosecutor. They don't understand a decades-long sentence that could come from that. They're not thinking about that. A violence interrupter can say, this could be your life. This could be your family's life. That's one of the many things that a violence interrupter does in mediating violence from happening. So they do a lot. It's not unlike social work. A violence interrupter has credibility because they live and are from the community. They have been justice involved, meaning they've likely been convicted of a crime. So they understand many of the challenges of the people they are meeting on the streets. And when conflict arises, they'll know how to relate and address the problems. This is the key to their effectiveness. Additionally, there's typically a firewall between them and the police, so you don't have to work through the mistrust that often exists between Black and Brown communities and the police. Now, how do I expand this good work to save even more lives? There are a lot of different pots where violence interruption money gets distributed. The Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Justice, governor's offices, mayor's offices, foundations, prosecutors' offices, and more. This is part of why it's so complicated doing this work, because the money comes from so many different places. Typically, the funds flow to a nonprofit with resources that then fund smaller, hyper-local organizations with the connections to the community. Some programs here in Baltimore, where I live, have had to float operations for months waiting for funds to come in. They recently, specifically, a violence interruption program that I work with here in Baltimore they had a big win. The community of Cherry Hill in Baltimore, Maryland, saw 365 days without a single shooting. That's why I'm working to secure funding to provide more certainty to these programs and expand the good work that's being done. The streams of work will be twofold, and this is where I'm broadening back out again. Police violence is gun violence. That's focused on Black and Brown people usually. And my work on reforming police to make policing more accountable and less violent is part of that work. It doesn't typically get categorized as such, but this is also gun violence in communities. There's also what I've been focusing on, which is interpersonal violence that I've been addressing. This is more complicated and takes a varied approach, which violence interrupters are a key tool to address. This will be the crux of my work. And with that, as a good lobbyist who generally meets with Congress for about 10 to 15 minutes, I'm going to yield back the balance of my time, and I really look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Jose. You've been listening to Jose Santos Woss, the Director of Justice Reform at Friends Committee on National Legislation. Our next speaker is Kris Brown, President of Brady. Kris?
Well, thanks so much, Judy, and appreciate being here as someone who worked on Capitol Hill. for 8 years. Jose, I appreciate your comments, and I respect the gentleman from Baltimore. Before I get into my remarks, I do have some slides to share, and I understood that perhaps I would be given the steering to do that. Is that correct? Just
Yes, you
before I
should
launch
be able
into
to do
this?
so. I think you have permission. Go ahead and give it a try.
Okay. I'm not quite sure, to be honest, how I take over to do that.
Well, do you know, if you go on the share, where the green square on the bottom that says share screen, if your PowerPoint is open already, is it open?
Yeah.
All right, and then go to share screen and then click on it.
Can
And
you
is
all
that
see
what you
that?
want? We
Yeah.
can't, and then you probably want to, start the slideshow so that it's big.
Ah, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. Didn't need to do that.
That's all right.
All
There you
right. Can everyone see that?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Well, thanks so much, Russ and Linda, first of all, for inviting Brady to the League of Women Voters, to Rosemary and Judy for participating, to the other distinguished panelists. This work is so important, and it's a pleasure to present what I will present alongside you, because the work you're doing is so very, very important to saving lives. And to each of you who are participating, thank you for taking time to be a part of what I hope will be extremely informative, because gun violence is an epidemic in this country. It will take all of us to address this issue. There is no other country in America today that suffers the kind of gun violence that we do. And as I think Jose so accurately put, it's also a racial justice issue, because we have individuals across this country, Black and brown in particular, who are targeted and who are losing their lives at appreciably higher rates than their white counterparts. And that's because of guns. Gun violence is now the largest killer, the #1 killer of children across this country. And we all need to join hands to do something about it. The good news that I'm here to share is that we do have solutions, and we know they work. Before I get into the extreme risk protection order presentation, I just want to say a few words about Brady, and then I want to talk for just a minute about Jose's remarks about community violence interruption, because that work is so critically important. And I feel compelled to give a plug for why that's so important. For Brady, we've been around for a long time. We're the oldest gun violence prevention organization in the United States. We were founded, of course, by Jim and Sarah Brady. Jim Brady was shot in the line of duty only 3 months into serving as Ronald Reagan's press secretary. Of course, that was in the assassination attempt of Ronald Reagan. After he was shot, he had grievous injuries. In fact, he died on the operating table. A surgeon revived him, brought him back to life. He did eventually die, though, and his autopsy report shows, from the bullet wound. And that's not unlike many victims of gun violence in this country. We talk about the 45,000 Americans who are killed by gun violence every single year, a uniquely American epidemic. We also need to focus on the 80,000 Americans who are shot and have to live every year with those injuries for the rest of their lives. The economic consequence of that to us alone, if that weren't enough to act, just the emotional consequence, is in the billions. We must fix this issue and address it. Brady now takes a comprehensive approach to this issue. We're very proud that Jim and Sarah didn't take no. They shook hands, not fists. They united red and blue states across the country, gun owners and non-gun owners, to achieve at that time what was considered impossible. And it's because they didn't give up. It took 6 years and 7 votes, but they finally got the Brady Law enacted in 1993. To date, that law has stopped more than 4.5 million sales of guns to individuals who are prohibited purchasers. We're so proud of that legacy and the lives that have been saved as a result of that, but there's much more to do. And part of that is also recognizing that we have to be informed by our history and have a clear-eyed view about where we can do better. One of the things that I think, and Brady thinks, has gone wrong is the approach to enforcement that was reflected in the crime bill that passed in the 1990s. Keep in mind, the Brady bill was included in that crime bill. And that crime bill had as its premise, part of it, the famous 3 strikes and you're out. And the focus was exclusively on this notion, which has been disproven, that some people are just born bad. And if we lock them up, we'll solve our crime problem. That is manifestly inaccurate. It is not true. And we have a huge disproportionate number of Black men in particular who are incarcerated as a result of that, with relatively lower level gun offenses. Where we have failed to put significant effort is actually on the supply side. How do folks access these guns in the first place, and who is selling them? And I just want to say, before I get into the ERPOs, what Brady does is work on that supply side of the issue. So we're focusing on the 5% of gun dealers in this country. And keep in mind, we have more gun dealers in America than we have McDonald's and Starbucks combined. And what we know is that 5% of those dealers are responsible for 90% of crime guns that are flooding the streets of places like Baltimore and Chicago. And that's why Brady has partnered with the Illinois State Police, and we are using data-driven solutions to help the Illinois State Police target those gun dealers that are the worst actors and shut them down or reform them. That is a complement to the incredibly important violence interruption work that Jose talked about. The two of those are really related and important. And I just wanted to let you know that if you think about any kind of public health issue, you have to focus on the supply side, which is what Brady is doing, and the demand side, which is really what violence interruption is about. And that's why both of them need funding and need support. So thank you for that. I just wanted to put that in context for a minute. And now about ERPOs. What I'm here to do, in now a relatively shorter period of time, is to answer some questions you might have about what are called extreme risk protection orders. And in your state of Illinois, you have one that was signed into law in August 2021. Governor Pritzker signed legislation that adds yearly training on the state's firearm restraining order, or as Eric will call them and others, FROs. There's an acronym for everything. And that is for law enforcement officers in particular, but it also creates a public education campaign through the State Department of Health in Illinois. There's an initiative called Speak for Safety Illinois. That's an advocate-generated public education campaign to raise awareness of the FRO process. The leaders of the campaign have worked with the Department of Public Health to hold trainings and provide connections to counseling and guidance on requesting these orders. Now, what are these orders and what do they do? Let me just give a synopsis for a minute. These orders are court orders. They are ex parte, meaning you do not have to have the person who's the subject of the order in court to seek the order. They are obtained typically by law enforcement. That's how Illinois' law works. In many cases, you can have other individuals. It's law enforcement and family in Illinois. But in a state like California, where I am now, because I'm traveling for work, it's law enforcement, it's family, it's educators, and it's healthcare providers who can seek these orders. And what the orders do is, if issued, remove firearms for a temporary period of time, 30 days, but they can be extended for up to a year and beyond that, from an individual who is at risk to him or herself or others. These laws have been around for a little while, probably 15, 20 years, but after Parkland, they particularly gained momentum. Today, 19 states and the District of Columbia have enacted these extreme risk laws, and they are quite important, and they're doing a lot of good. Now, for states that have had laws enacted even more recently, and states that have had them in effect for more historical times, we've done a bit of a survey to share with you what are the things that some of the states that have experienced more extreme risk protection orders being issued, what are they doing? And what are the lessons learned that folks like you who are participating might be able to take away to say, what are the kinds of things that I could do in my own local community, in my region, or in my state to encourage more of these kinds of orders to be put in place? Because obviously, these orders work in complement to other strong gun laws. They're not a substitute for it. And I'm happy that so many of you have been, I'm sure, on the front lines of making Illinois one of the better states for gun laws in this country. And thank you for so many of you who undoubtedly helped make that happen. The extreme risk protection order, however, is a critical tool that complements those other laws that are in effect, and gives the ability for those really at the front lines of seeing risk to have a tool to be able to remove firearms from individuals who are often a risk to themselves because of suicide, and sometimes also a risk to others, including stopping potential mass shootings from happening. So these are really, really important tools. And I'm going to go through quickly some states where we would really, as Brady, and we're a national organization, so we help states across this country implement extreme risk protection orders. We craft legislation that we think will get through the state legislatures because we want to expand the number of states beyond just the 19 that currently have them. And we also think about the educational piece of this, because it's one thing to pass a law. Obviously, that's very important, and we're so glad Illinois has done that. It doesn't matter if you pass a law, however, if the people who need to know how to implement the law don't know about that law. And that's why some of the states and what they've done that I'll take you through here in a second are so very important. In King County, Washington, the King County District Attorney's Office developed an entire unit through that office that specializes in the implementation of extreme risk protection orders, which are the same thing as FROZE. We're so acronym laden in the gun violence prevention movement. I just want to clarify, we're talking about the same thing here. And what did they do? They created a website with information and steps on how to request an extreme risk protection order, because you have to adduce evidence, maybe emails, maybe statements from neighbors, family members, etc., that indicate to a court why it is that this particular individual could be a risk to himself or others. So it really walks individuals through how to do that. They crafted a model policy for jurisdictions throughout the state to follow, including having a point of contact to guide law enforcement and communities through the process. That's been hugely important, and they've had a large number of ERPOs, larger than many other jurisdictions, having been entered because of this, because people on the front lines of seeing the risk know how to actually get these orders. They hosted 3 summits for law enforcement, judges, prosecutors, and community advocates. They led training for county crisis line workers, also hugely important with this, for those who are receiving those calls to understand the availability of extreme risk protection orders. They crafted training resources for the state's police academy, and they also worked with local Veterans Affairs offices. This is really crucial to advise officials on suicide prevention among former members of the military. I think it's important to note here, I'll just say, for the 45,000 Americans on average who are dying every year by gun violence, about 68% of those are by suicide. 20 veterans a day on average are ending their life by suicide in this country, the vast majority with unsecured firearms in their homes. So that is a really, really important component of training that I'd really like to plug, and have those of you who want to get more involved in ERPO implementation think about those constituencies as audiences for this training. New York, we worked with New York in putting their public campaign together. They had a kickoff conference event. They had 3 conferences to help educators, including teachers, school administrators, and parent representatives, understand the new law and how to use it to keep schools safe. I don't have to tell any of you on this phone that one of the key risk factors associated with a school shooting is access to a loaded, unsecured gun in the home. 75% of school shooters get their gun from a home where the firearm is not safely stored. So understanding those risk factors and educating educators about the availability of this law and how to work with police to ensure that this law is implemented is very important. A call center was also created in the state of New York and a new website as well. So all of that we would view as best practice. In Fairfax County, Virginia, just last year, a nonprofit was formed called the Safer Country Partnership with members of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors and the Commonwealth's attorney to announce a county-wide extreme risk protection order law public awareness campaign. So that included advertisements, billboards, things that actually educated the full panoply of the public about this. And of course, there's also a website and a marketing component, which I think is also quite important. So they came up with a slogan, "Prevent a gun tragedy, speak up," which is really what this ERPO is allowing all of us to do when we see this kind of risk. Other state efforts to cover: the California Speak for Safety initiative, which Brady launched and is now utilized in other states. And we're part of the coalition in Illinois that's looking at these things. We have one of our key advocates as part of that. That's a public education tool for frontline intermediaries. What I mean by that are healthcare providers, social workers, law enforcement, educators who are at the front lines of identifying the risk, family members, to be able to educate them about how to seek an extreme risk order and how to do so effectively. So that training on that website is really important and is really helping California increase the number of extreme risk protection orders that have been put into effect. Maryland also created a robust statewide website identifying where their extreme risk law fits in relation to other protective orders, of course, like domestic violence restraining orders and other kinds of protective orders, so that prosecutors, law enforcement, and the general public can distinguish which kind of order might need to be put in place depending on the particular facts and circumstances at issue. Finally, just a few larger comments here. I am thrilled to say that Congress did pass and President Biden did sign the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. That includes a number of very, very important initiatives that Brady helped get through. One of them that we're very proud of is the authorization of $750 million. This is the largest single investment in gun violence prevention through this legislation that Congress has ever made. That funding will come through the Department of Justice's Edward Byrne Memorial Justice program, and it's for states to incentivize new states. So not Illinois, these are states that beyond the 19 that have already enacted extreme risk laws. It contains incentives for states that haven't done that yet to do so. It also provides funding, and we don't have all of the details yet about how this will work. Believe me, we're anxiously awaiting this. Will assist states like Illinois that have passed these laws to effectively implement those laws. And that's really, really, really important. The difference between saving a few lives and saving countless lives is how many people understand and know the availability of these kinds of tools. So what can we do as individuals? Well, if you live in Illinois and you know someone or come in contact with people who you think could be at risk of hurting themselves or others with a firearm, you should know what options you have and others have related to seeking a FRO. And please visit your state's website around this, which we've provided here, and I'm happy to put in the chat. That's speakforsafetyil.org. which really walks through exactly how you can seek these orders and who you should go to. These tools can only work if the public and our leaders are aware of their existence. And so what we also need to do is lift our voices. So many of you are part of organizations like the League of Women Voters that have incredible contacts and relationships with so many constituencies that are actually at the front lines of seeking these orders. Ask the question, have you been trained around this? And work with groups like Brady or other groups in the gun violence prevention space to ensure that folks that you know are on the front lines of this are trained and have the information. So use your voice to talk, to educate, and inquire about this tool and why it's so important. And I'll just conclude here because it's really kind of eye-opening. Gun surrender orders have been in effect for some time now, as I said. Across the United States, since 2020, more than 15,000 court-ordered surrenders have been issued. The rundown per capita shows that Florida, the state that only passed its extreme risk protection order post the MSD shooting, which was in 2019 that they passed that. That shooting was February 14th, 2018, has 5,872 orders. That's a huge number of orders compared to every other state because they've invested in actual training. Now, Illinois hasn't had its law for that long, but it is fifth from the bottom in terms of number of orders at 154. And that's not because there are bad people. It's not because people don't want to do these if they know. It's about education. And I think there's a huge role for each of you in lifting your voices, working at the local level, which is wonderful. I've done it with my own police in my hometown of Arlington because I want to see how easy or hard this is. It's not hard. And prosecutors, and I'll turn it over then to my distinguished colleague from Lake County here in a second. Prosecutors actually could really use some help based on our experience, educating law enforcement themselves around this and these tools. And so there's a huge opportunity to really enhance and improve within your community knowledge, awareness of this. And for every extreme risk protection order that's issued, undoubtedly there are lives saved. What I would say, that's, I don't think an extreme statement, but the data also shows that. The longest standing extreme risk law in effect is in Connecticut. Daniel Webster and another researcher from UC Davis in California researched the impact of that. They found that for every extreme risk protection order that had been issued in the state, approximately 12 lives were saved, because it's not just the individual who is at risk, but others who are potentially at risk for larger shootings. So I hope that spurs many of you to get involved and to get engaged with this life-saving tool, and appreciate any questions you might have at the end. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Kris. For those of you who may have just joined, we've been listening to Kris Brown, president of Brady, and has made some really fantastic remarks. Next speaker on our panel is Eric Reinhardt, our Lake County State's Attorney.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much to Judy and to the League of Women Voters and Rosemary and Linda and Russ, and to everyone who organized this event. Thank you so much to Kris and Jose for just your unbelievable comments and your work in this field of gun violence prevention. What I appreciate so much about both of our speakers is that we're really talking about how to prevent all gun violence. We're talking about how to prevent suicides with ERPOs. We heard from Jose about other types of violence, not just gun violence, but really all of the violence that unfortunately can exacerbate really all types of violence and certainly increase gun violence. Again, my name is Eric Reinhardt. I'm the Lake County State's Attorney. Our office handles the prosecutions of individuals who've committed all offenses, but I also see my role as working with all of you and with the community and with policy experts like Kris and Jose to reduce crime, to reduce gun violence. I don't think that a state's attorney's office should only be reacting, that we should be receiving a file from the police, but that we should be engaging the community, talking to stakeholders in the community, whether it's schools, whether it's businesses, whether it's faith-based organizations, whether it's our government partners, whether it's our law enforcement partners. The job of the state's attorney, I believe, is to also work to reduce violence and crime wherever possible. So I'd like to share my screen if that's okay. Make sure I can do that. Thank you so much.
Of course.
I think it's working.
There it goes.
Can everybody see that?
Yes. And then you just need to start it then.
Great. Okay. Are we on the first slide? Great. Okay. All right. Thank you. I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes about what's going on in Lake County with a lot of the things that Jose has been talking about, and also Kris, and also our own unique problem in Lake County. As everyone knows, Lake County has seen a rise in gun violence over the last few years, consistent with what we're seeing nationally and statewide. These are some of the numbers that show the trend, but really I think this slide better shows it. In 2019, we had 33 total homicides. And, I've broken out homicides and suicides here because, to go to Jose's point, all of these are preventable deaths, to quote the coroner. I heard her recently speaking on this. And our goal is to work on preventable deaths. I've included officer involved shootings because I think those are something that we need to keep track of, obviously, and talk about. We see homicides, we see suicides, and suicides by firearm. We see that the homicides and homicides, shooting homicides, have gone up. Unfortunately, in 2022, we're going to be at a high watermark, primarily because of not only the Cremo incident, but a few incidents where several people, unfortunately, lost their lives in a single incident. And so, what can we do in Lake County to work on this? Increase in gun violence and other forms of violence. This is our increase in aggravated batteries with firearms. This is very important that we also keep track of this because common sense will tell you that aggravated battery with a firearm, that means somebody got hit, could be a murder, right? When we have homicides by firearm, obviously somebody has lost their life. But if we have somebody hit, frankly, even somebody shot at, we have to take notice. And these statistics are also concerning as we see the increase. I'd like to talk very briefly about what the state's attorney's office is doing from a traditional response. I hope everybody will forgive the word traditional. I don't think we should think traditionally about such an important problem and a problem that really has plagued our country, unlike any other country, with respect to the resources that we have, not only in this country but in this county. So our traditional response, the sort of response that you might expect a state's attorney to talk about, a prosecutor to talk about. All these things are new. All of these things are new since I have become state's attorney, but they are sort of an increase in resources, if you will. But the very first one is sort of a change in mindset. We have to be committed to data and evidence-based solutions. Now that I'm state's attorney, we have a data dashboard that tracks not only crime, but it also tracks disparities in our justice system with respect to arrests, with respect to charging decisions. I apologize. And so we need to track these disparities because, as Jose said, that's part of the overall situation in our society and the things that are tearing it at the fabric of our unity with respect to our legal system and beyond. So we have to have a commitment to data dashboards and to evidence-based solutions. We have increased resources here locally. We've built the first ever violent crime unit. We've launched a human trafficking task force. We have a domestic violence prevention program, which we received a grant for, that provides treatment to first-time offenders if they take responsibility quickly. And so instead of doing trials that take maybe months after the violence has occurred, we incentivize people to take responsibility and to get treatment early. This is a program that has been successful in Kane County, and I'm thrilled to be able to bring it to Lake County for the first time. We've also increased our resources in our cyber investigation. Very importantly, we've increased our victim witness counselors, and we are using trauma-informed care because we know that when individuals are harmed by violence, sexual violence, firearm violence, domestic violence, that the chances go up that there are ripples in their life and in their family that indicates that unfortunately they may go out and hurt others. We help individuals because it is our moral duty and it is our moral responsibility, but we also have to acknowledge the connection. I think Jose spoke a little bit about this. We have to acknowledge the connection, and so many of our offenders who do go on to hurt people have been victimized themselves. This is the cycle that we have to think about and explicitly connect so that we can work against it. Finally, a non-traditional response is the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative, which is to put a lot of these ideas together, a lot of the ideas that Jose spoke about, we're bringing right here to Lake County. Our Gun Violence Prevention Initiative is with the philosophy to reduce gun violence through restorative justice principles, strategies, tactics, while advocating for investment of resources in at-risk individuals. I apologize, I've got some extraneous text there, I apologize. I want to just talk a little bit about the development of it here, and it connects again with a lot of Jose's ideas. I personally took a visit with a friend of mine, or someone who would become a friend, named Sarah Konishnik, and we visited the Institute for Nonviolence in Chicago. And we saw that they were doing an initiative like this, where they connected community-based organizations, law enforcement partners, faith-based organizations to interact directly with the individuals who are at risk and in risk. And the Institute for Nonviolence had reduced violence in the Austin neighborhood in 2019. In 2021, after I became state's attorney, I began to meet with and talk with national and statewide experts about what we could do here in Lake County. We've seen success in Minnesota, New Orleans, California, Chicago neighborhoods. We heard about the successes in Baltimore that Jose discussed in those 365 days. I think that's what it was. I apologize. Those days where there wasn't, where no one was shot. That's exactly what we need to duplicate in our underserved communities in Lake County. Finally, we got the idea for how to fund this, which was to use ARPA funds. The White House had issued regulations which said that ARPA could be used for community violence interruption, CVI, and that was what sort of got us going. And so finally, we applied for some ARPA funds here in Lake County. At the same time, in 2021, Governor Pritzker also announced the formation of the first ever statewide office to deal with firearm violence prevention. Now, we didn't end up getting any funds from the governor's office, not yet, because we were seeking our own county-based funds. What are the basic components of violence prevention? Jose is literally a subject matter expert in this area. I'm not. I'm a lawyer. But I think my job as the state's attorney is to be a convener with respect to bringing in these different ideas and these different forces to do good. It focuses on prevention and root causes, not only in the community and investing in the community, but in the individual. We're going to bring in street outreach workers, credible ambassadors, credible community members to work off hours, on hours, all hours, and we're going to professionalize that. They're going to be paid. They're going to be given fringe benefits so that we can get community members engaged in this. Not only are those people going to identify at-risk individuals, and the reason that I thought this should be in a prosecutor's office is because our justice system can identify at-risk individuals. Sometimes these prevention initiatives are in health departments. I've seen them in mayor's offices, all fantastic. No shade being sent their way. But I think putting it in a prosecutor's office allows us to connect it to some restorative justice principles that I'll talk about in a moment, but also intelligence, right? We're not going to saturate individuals who are at risk or in risk with surveillance. We're going to saturate them with services. Individuals who were shot at but maybe weren't hurt. Individuals who were in the car but weren't arrested because they didn't happen to be possessing a firearm or anything else. Also, individuals who are coming home from prison. Individuals who are coming off of probation or coming out of the jail. This is all intelligence that a prosecutor's office has to identify people who need help. And I want to be very clear. This is a prevention program. This is not a response to people who have engaged in the violence. Unfortunately, we will have to use incarceration. These are responses to people who are at risk and in risk. And if people ask me more about that, I can explain that further. This is a prevention plan to stop the shooting before it happens. And our caseworkers, our street outreach workers, are going to connect at-risk individuals, primarily youth. Our average age of shooters is going down. We're going to be connecting at-risk individuals with programs to help them right here locally. Lake County has an amazing mosaic of community-based organizations, CBOs. We don't want to sound too much like government speak, right? But community-based organizations and CBOs, we have an amazing mosaic of those here in Lake County, and we intend to utilize them. If they have programming directed at gun violence, we want to marshal and focus those resources. March of 2022, we received $560,000 from the Lake County Board. Thank you, Lake County Board. And I need to change the slide because we've now received $900,000 from the legislature. Thank you, Senator Johnson and Representative Mayfield. We have received $900,000, $1.4 million locally here. On June 3rd, 2022, we announced the start of the GVPI so that the community-based organizations could apply for the funds to hire the interrupters. Marcus McAllister is a nationwide expert that we have consulted with and retained to build the program. Sarah Konishnik is our chair of implementation that does the work for sustainability and that connects all of these pieces and community-based organizations to get this work going. Currently, I made it yellow and gray there. Currently, we are selecting our community-based organization. I hope to be able to announce that within the next week of who is going to hire the violence interrupters. We will then be hiring the violence interrupters in September and getting them out as fast as we can. I would have loved to have done this a year ago, but the funding came through in March of 2022. And so that's where we are. I would have loved to have gotten this done a year ago, but we could not do it without the funding for professional violence interrupters. We've also sought additional funding through the governor's office, the Office of Firearm Violence Prevention, the Department of Justice, and Congressman Schneider's office, who is working with us on community-based funding, which I'm sure Jose could teach me a ton about, and may be able to answer more questions about that. Oh, that means I'm towards the end here. Good, this is my graphic where I get to connect some of these ideas. So this graphic, I hope, shows a little bit of how this works. On the left, you see the referral sources. Schools, courts, law enforcement. And I know we have some law enforcement leaders here watching. Law enforcement has been incredibly supportive of this. The mayors in what's called the R3 zone of Lake County, which is where we are investing extra dollars to deal with gun violence prevention. All three mayors, McKinney, Taylor, and Rockingham, all wrote letters of support for this programming. The police chiefs are in support of this programming. We will apply violence interrupters to the areas of heat maps, perhaps that law enforcement identifies for us, in order to marshal our resources. Our community-based organizations, our faith-based organizations, DCFS. I don't think we talk about DCFS enough as a player in how we can make our communities safer, because unfortunately, so many children who are at risk can themselves go on to cause other problems. And so we need to be getting as many services as we can in this space. And so these different programs will connect to our gun violence prevention initiative, where we'll see interruption on the streets, we'll see services for individuals, and we'll see restorative justice in our courts. And again, that gets into why I think a state's attorney's office should be in the leader of this, because we can have a calibrated approach to justice. We can identify somebody in our courts who is a victim, but who may also need these services in a different way than maybe the traditional approach. We can work on expungements. We can work on diversion and deflection for nonviolent offenders so that a conviction doesn't lead to more economic instability. So that's why we have this restorative justice, idea. So this is a sort of a schematic. Some people find it useful, some people don't, they've told me. But I hope it's a little bit interesting. It is easily found on our website. So in conclusion, to kind of conclude with some resources, to conclude with some solutions that I think we've sort of talked about, this is what's going on locally. We have to continue to devote resources in our courthouse to violent cases to make sure that we are serving victims and frankly dealing with those cases where unfortunately somebody has been shot or shot at. We have to invest in those so that the community continues to believe that our courthouse will work to make them safer. We have to have community-wide implementation and expansion of the GBPI, which I've talked about. Thank you very much, Kris, for your work. The firearm restraining order, we only have had that 154. I think that was the number, and actually it was implemented in 2019, which makes your point even more salient, which is we've only had 154 of these statewide. That's not a Lake County number, folks. Statewide, we've only had 154 of those. If somebody's interested in that, I could answer a question as to why that is. But I can tell you this: the most firearm restraining orders have been filed by in DuPage County. So State's Attorney Berlin in DuPage County does trainings every 6 months about firearm restraining orders. Now, the State's Attorney's Office doesn't file these, but remember what I said at the beginning? I think my job is to do everything I can as a policy convener to talk about these problems. State's Attorney Berlin does these trainings once every 6 months for law enforcement. It's as simple as that. It's awareness. So we're going to be doing that in Lake County. We're going to be training people more often. I'm very proud to tell you that in April, I was named to the FRO task force. I'll be meeting with the state police tomorrow to get a best practices guide for what we can do statewide on firearm restraining orders. I have said what I believe. I believe we need legislation to ban assault weapons, to ban high capacity magazines, and to expand background checks. I think we need to invest in the state police, having an understanding of what's going on with people who apply for a FOID. As Jose talked about, we have to invest in our schools, our healthcare, our mental health and substance abuse, and our economic infrastructure. If we don't do that, we are going to keep trying these new ideas at the very top of the problem, and we will never get to the root causes. So I very much believe in that. I saw that one of the listeners here asked about bail reform. Bail reform is going to go into effect in January of 2023, and I think it eliminates disparities based on cash. But also allows courts to hold violent offenders without allowing them access to cash, which can be mysterious, right? I don't know how much money Judy's uncle has. I don't know how much money that is. And so judges won't be referring to cash anymore. They will simply be deciding whether violent offenders are in or out. It's just that straightforward. We have to change our rules of engagement. I appreciate so much that Jose talked about officer-involved shootings, the Safety Act, which passed. Change the rules of engagement where officers are only permitted to exercise deadly force to protect themselves or to protect others directly under the old law. Prior to the Safety Act, which I was proud to support, prior to that, officers actually were permitted to shoot some forcible fleeing felons. And that is not the law in Illinois anymore. The law is very focused on protection of the officers at all times, protection of the community, but there isn't this extra element about shooting forcible fleeing felons. Now, if you think somebody's a threat, a deadly threat, then they're a threat, but there's not that other component that isn't as much about imminent danger. And finally, we have to hold police accountable who break the law and increase our police accountability programs. We have the finest police officers in the land in Lake County, but we have to apply the law equally to everyone. So those are some of my concluding solutions. I would love to take any questions along with the other panelists. Back to you, Judy.
Okay, thank you so much. We did have solicited questions that came in as people registered. And so those are the ones that we're going to be going to first. The first question is, are there any actions or ordinances that the country can pass to keep automatic weapons out of the hands of criminals? We heard about some of the things that are being done, but are there ideas that are going to actually keep those automatic weapons out of the hands of criminals?
Who's the question directed to?
It wasn't directed to anyone because we solicited them in advance. So Kris, if you have some ideas, please share them.
Oh, sure. Well, one way is to have an assault weapons ban, because that really helps keeping automatic weapons out of the hands of all people, frankly. These are weapons of war that don't belong in a civil society from Brady's perspective, and that has long been our view. Obviously, we're really proud as Brady that we were able to many years ago help Highland Park craft and pass an assault weapons ban. It is tragic in so many horrific ways that they experienced after all of that work and effort, a horrific mass shooting. And, you know, very hard to internalize because it wasn't only helping to craft Highland Park's law, but our legal team defended that law all the way to the United States Supreme Court, which refused to grant cert, basically review that case, and it basically allowed the Seventh Circuit decision upholding that law to move forward. From Brady's perspective, we do want a federal ban on assault weapons. The U.S. House of Representatives passed that, thanks to so many across this country who are incredible advocates. It's pending in the Senate. I doubt that will be taken up, but we really do need a federal assault weapons ban. We have 8 states and the District of Columbia that have passed that. We would love to see the state of Illinois pass an assault weapons ban and stand ready to support that, and are very excited that in this next election cycle in November, the citizens of Oregon have put on the ballot the passage of both an assault weapons ban and a restriction on high capacity magazines. So those are the solutions that Brady in particular is working on, and we're really proud of that.
Great, thank you so much. I am going to go ahead and direct the next question to Jose, if I may, because you alluded to this in some of what you shared with us, Jose. How can we support gun violence prevention and gun control policies that advance racial justice as well?
Yeah, I mean, I alluded to that, and I think having violence interrupters, reaching out to, I know that we have a lot of folks from Illinois. You have a great senator in Senator Dick Durbin. He's the whip. He counts votes, and he really leads in the Senate with respect to what comes to the floor. So reaching out to him and asking him for more funding for violence interrupters would be great. I mean, we've reached an age where just about everything is racial justice, how we prioritize economic investment, how we look at public dollars going to different government initiatives, reducing criminal sentences for nonviolent drug offenses and also for other offenses as well. I mean, I can have a whole panel just on what we can do for racial justice because there's so many areas where we can be doing a lot more. But if I had to just pick one, I would say reach out to Senator Durbin and have him do more prioritizing funding for violence interrupters. Eric mentioned this in his remarks, the CVI funds, the Community Violence Intervention Initiative, that was funded $50 million. It's a brand new program. So we're seeing momentum for funding violence interrupters. We just need more of it. For FY23, which is the funding cycle that's coming up starting in October, the House put forward $150 million. So we're making a lot of progress. Unlikely going to see that big of a number in the Senate, but we just need more folks like the folks on this call reaching out to your senators, and there's a great one here in Illinois, Senator Dick Durbin.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next question deals with Lake County. So Eric, I'm going to ask you to take it. How will Lake County's new gun violence prevention initiative help reduce gun violence? And what makes this initiative so unique?
Yeah, thank you. Well, Jose, I think, explained some of or many of the philosophical underpinnings, which is that if those credible ambassadors from the community, we're not bringing them in from somewhere else. And even Marcus McAllister, who is my training expert, he grew up in Waukegan. He's worked nationally, but he still lives in Waukegan. And so those interrupters are going to work in our hotspots to mediate disputes, to prevent retaliation when something does happen. We had a killing, I think early this morning at 1 or 2 a.m. in North Chicago. from gun violence. And so those interrupters should be out there finding what the networks are, trying to understand what the social networks are, what social media is saying about this, so that they can cool the situation down, prevent retaliation, but also to be on the streets, to be a presence in the schools. For the most part, much of the violence, the gun violence, comes from youth and comes from disputes that our youth have. Active violence is often impulsive. Active violence is impulsive, and we know that youth struggle with that. That they struggle with calculating long-term consequences. We need to be interrupting these disputes as fast as possible. And it's very sad how many disputes are now social media disputes. That I can't tell you how many times I've seen that as a criminal attorney in Waukegan, or excuse me, in Lake County, working in Waukegan for the last 25 years, for the last 20 years. And so that's how we're going to do it. But we're also going to give those individuals services. And we think, 30 homicides is too many. One homicide is too many. Okay, I want to be very clear. But imagine saturating hundreds, dozens of individuals with services. I think we can make a dent in those 35 homicides that we see in Lake County, and that's why it's separated into neighborhoods, right, Jose? In Baltimore and in Chicago, you can't just say we have violence interrupters in Baltimore. You want to make it localized, and that's what we're going to do in our underrepresented areas in Lake County.
Okay, thank you very much. This next question, I'd kind of like to hear ideas from each of you, if you could. We have a lot of interested citizens, activists on the call, and I think everyone shares in the question that was submitted. What can we in Lake County do to serve as a model for bringing together multiple organizations, particularly including service providers and health agencies, in order to work against violence in our communities?
Maybe I'll lead off on this because Brady has worked on this in many communities across the country. And I would say there is no formula for success in doing that except earnest interest by each of you participating. And to quote someone much more skilled in social movements and perhaps anthropology than me, Margaret Mead has noted that you can never underestimate what a small group of committed citizens can achieve. And that is undoubtedly true. I do think that if you think about the network effects of what groups can do together around the issue of gun violence, it's huge. And it's not just any one organization, especially based on the things that we're talking about. There's so many community organizations focused on youth engagement, focused on voter registration, focused on healthcare advocacy. And what I'd really love to see, and what's worked well for Brady across the country when we're engaged this way, is actually having a convening of all of those groups, because each of their missions touches on the issue of gun violence prevention. It may not be stated in a way that's direct, but for those that are focused on this, there's no doubt that gun violence itself has a limiting impact on their ability to achieve their mission. And there are very simple things that can be done collectively that, with the synergistic reach of combined organizations, have huge effect. And I'll give one example of what I mean, but I'm sure Jose and Eric have many others. On the issue of extreme risk protection orders, what's worked well, and I hope I covered this to some extent in the slides, is a convening where you can educate collectively constituencies that are impacted and on the front lines of this, and give the resources to be able to understand how to utilize those kinds of tools. And across the country, what we see, and this is borne out in the statistics that I put forward. I know that one of the folks participating, I saw her in the chat, is Amanda Wilcox, who helped pass California's extreme risk law, just so you know. So there are a lot of experts on this call. Is the more people that you can come together and educate simultaneously about this, what you will find is an increase typically in the number of extreme risk protection orders in that jurisdiction. And it's rare in public life that you have this action and reward for the action. And that's one very easy example of it. So that's the kind of thing that I think lifting your voices and making sure that you're using the network effect of your other organizations, even if they're not a gun violence prevention organization. I'm sure that their mission focuses on the kinds of issues that touch gun violence, and this would be something hugely meaningful for your groups to work on.
Okay, thank you. Any of the other panelists care to add to that in any way?
I just, one of the, it's, whether we're talking about the froze, whether we're talking about access to guns for suicides, whether we're talking about, unfortunately, one of the cases we just prosecuted, a fender bender turned into road rage, which turns into a deadly situation. The more, I'm sorry, this is my opinion. The more guns we have around, the more all of these everyday incidents, whether it's a social media dispute, whether it's a fender bender, turn violent. Why do we have, or we have individuals with 15 guns, and then unfortunately, they may have a mental health breakdown, and then we're filing froze and ERPOs because they have 15 guns. We have so many guns around because, in my opinion, there is a group that profits from that. The gun industry profits from the increase in firearms. They want to scare people and say that we all need to have firearms to protect ourselves. I believe in home protection. I believe in self-defense, but guns are everywhere. People have 27 guns because they can. I disagree with that. Okay, I disagree with that type of culture. Okay, and certainly home defense is important. But on the other hand, there is somebody that is profiting from guns being everywhere, because once they go everywhere, they start to be stolen. They start to be sold on the gray market, on the black market, whatever it may be. So at least in my opinion is we have to talk about the number of firearms that we have, how the gun industry has profited from that, and how they profit from the scare tactics that make everybody keep buying guns. So that's how I feel about it, and I think that's something that we can all work on in many different aspects of our society to address that.
Okay.
That'll probably get you some questions.
Jose, anything to add there?
No, I think Kris and Eric
Pretty well.
said, yeah.
Okay, I agree. I just wanted to give you that opportunity.
Thank you.
We had a couple of questions come in early that are really tough to answer. One is, would the steps that are being proposed have stopped the Highland Park shooting? And another that's a little bit associated is, would an extreme risk protection order have been appropriate in the case of the Highland Park massacre? I think that when we consider what took place recently in Lake County, that everybody on the call from Lake County will be excited to hear about the extreme risk protection order. So my question would be, in view of that type of shooting, what is a person to do to spread the word about ERPO? And is the link that you shared the best way to do a report? Could someone sort of expand on that for those of us who are novices in this area?
So in Illinois, there are several individuals who can begin the process of filing a FRO or an ERPO. I'm going to use those interchangeably so that you continue to remember that everything Kris said is fantastic. ERPOs and FROs they're just acronyms. Okay, we have a calibrated way to stop individuals who are at risk from having firearms. I don't want to speak too specifically about the Primo case. I'm also involved, obviously, in prosecuting that case. But the law started in 2019. The public facts are that the Highland Park Police Department had contact with Primo when he didn't have firearms and when he wasn't talking about firearms. Okay, we know there were family incidents, but there also firearms were not on everybody's radar in that individual situation. That's just the truth. Can there be better checks with the Illinois State Police? Can there be more data with the Illinois State Police regarding individuals who have the police called on them? Okay, but I mean, there is a trade-off to that, right? Just because you have the police called on you, you know, you're in a database now. We have to think about that, and we have to calibrate it, right? Now, obviously, in that case, there was some mental health issues. There were extreme threats going on. I'm not minimizing what was happening in that case, but also, you know, firearms were not in the house, or he wasn't saying, I can't wait to get a firearm. So that's what was going on in that case, and that was in 2020. And the Highland Park Police Department did notify the state police. Generally speaking, we have to increase awareness of the firearm restraining orders. Police can file them, family members can file them. I can try to put a link in the state attorney's office. Unfortunately, right now under the law cannot file them. I don't know if there'll be changes to that. You know, happy to advocate for that. But right now, the state attorney's office doesn't file them. We can provide assistance. If you have any lawyers on the call, you know, lawyers don't think of themselves as providing assistance. They're either in a case or out of a case, but that's okay. We're happy to help and to do the training and to help people with paperwork. So I'll put a link in. Family members can file them. For the most part, though, we do want to encourage people to talk to law enforcement for this reason. Law enforcement can file them and are going to be better at this, right, than people who are doing it for the first time. They're all getting training on it. They can call us, you know, more easily than a member of the community can. But also, part of the fro is taking the guns out. And to take the guns out of a home with a search warrant, again, signed by a judge, you need law enforcement. So you actually can get a fro without law enforcement. It will put a block on you being able to get a FOID or being able to purchase a gun. Nothing wrong with that. But if you want to remove firearms from a house, then you do have, law enforcement has to be involved. Now, the courts will contact law enforcement for you. I'm simply pointing out that it's going to go faster if individuals who are interested in this contact law enforcement, so that it's one government move with respect to somebody who is dangerous. And so I'll put a link in terms of how people can go to the courts. But I will say this. We also remove access to firearms when you're arrested for an offense. We also remove access to firearms when you have a standard order of protection. So one of the reasons why we have less fros are because we already have a pretty good system of removing access to firearms if there is an arrest. The fros are when there are not an arrest. Yes, law enforcement is involved, but you might be dealing with somebody who's mentally ill and is at home making threats, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be arrested. Your standard domestic battery case will have somebody lose access to firearms within, you know, by a judge in that case because you've been arrested. So I do always want to point that out so that people are thinking about how this is a little bit in the, you know, in the nooks and crannies of a typical case. It's not really like there's been an arrest. It's more that law enforcement is acting proactively, and then a judge decides whether somebody should, you know, have a fro against them. I'll see if I can get that link.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I think the next question is actually for you as well, Eric. This will be the last of our pre-submitted questions, and then Rosemary is going to ask some of the questions that came in through the chat. So our last question that was submitted in advance is, how does Safety Act reduce gun violence and make our streets safer?
So the Safety Act, well, the bail reform aspect of the Safety Act will go into effect on January 1, 2023. So it hasn't had any impact yet with respect to ending cash bail. I'll talk about that in a second. Some parts of the Safety Act have gone into effect, including changing the rules of engagement for police officers. I think that makes us safer because it focuses on self-defense and defense of others as opposed to something else. It's that something else that I don't think we ever needed. Police should protect themselves and protect other people directly. But with respect to ending cash bail, not using, there's a lot of talk about this right now in Illinois. Everybody isn't getting out because we've got rid of cash bail. We didn't end pretrial detention, okay? We are not using cash as the way to answer the age-old question, who should we hold before a trial? Appropriately, legal systems that believe in the presumption of innocence and say that everyone is innocent until they're proven guilty struggle with this question. Who should we detain when they haven't been found guilty yet? That is a centuries-long problem. The answer is not what's in my wallet. That's the point. It's a tough question, but it doesn't have anything to do, the answer doesn't have anything to do with cash. Okay. Somebody who has hurt somebody shouldn't be able to access their cash, their uncle's cash, anyone else's cash in their life to say, well, I get my freedom and you don't. I'm sorry you didn't have as much cash. We know that primarily that due to economic racism, structural racism, social racism, historical racism, classism, and sexism, that people have different levels of access to cash that doesn't have anything to do with moral worth, okay? Once we accept that, then why are we using cash to determine who gets out? Okay, judges can then hold individuals if they determine that they are a threat, if they've been charged with a violent offense, a sex offense, a weapon offense. Every victims' rights group, the major victims' rights groups are for this bill, and here's why. Survivors of abuse will not have to wonder whether their abuser found $2,500 from a friend. They will not have to worry about whether their uncle found $2,500 under a mattress. That's why survivors groups are for this, and it will keep us safer. It will allow judges to focus on dangerousness instead of guessing about access to finances.
Thank you very much. Rosemary, will you please share some of the questions for our panelists that have come in the chat?
I would love to, and I meant to disable the Q&A, but I was fiddling around and showing somebody how to do webinar, and I wound up with, so we have questions in the Q&A and in the chat, so I'll try to go between them. But before we do that, first of all, I put a website in for about FROs, Eric, and is it speakforsafetyill.org? Is that the right website that I put in there?
I don't know, because I'm not looking at your link yet.
Oh, okay. All right. I think that is the correct one. And also, Kris, you have a little paragraph there that did you want to expand on that while
Sure. Yeah. And I'm sorry, I'm having a lot of trouble with my computer here. I tried to unmute myself, but that did not work. Yes, that is the right website. I did happen to link on it. And so it is the correct one. And I think is a treasure trove of information. I was just responding in real time to a few questions that were asked. And so a question was asked about when the FRO went into effect. It was January 1st, 2019. Illinois is focused on law enforcement or family. Some states have expanded beyond that to educators and healthcare providers. That's not the decision that was made in Illinois. And I don't think it's a bad decision not to include those. I'll say that I have very mixed views on that. But I do think that obviously expanded constituencies, including healthcare providers and educators, can be on the front lines of seeking those orders. And that's why the education component is so key. That's what you see in the Speak for Safety Illinois site. That's what Brady is very focused, along with other organizations. We're certainly not the only one on training and education of constituencies around this. And we're so proud of our chapter leaders and other leaders in this country, but especially in the state of Illinois, who really are experts around this and are available to assist those with groups that may be connected to gun violence prevention and with the right constituencies who need to be trained to provide the right kind of content to assist with this. Because the more people we train, the more orders we get, the more lives that are saved. It's like a math equation, literally. So I'd like to know that every American understands the availability of these orders in states that have them. So yes, thank you for the opportunity to amplify that point.
Of course, hey, jump in anytime. You're the expert here. Just quickly, the terms at risk and in risk have been mentioned. Is there a difference between those two? Anybody, or just interchangeable?
I'm not sure of the term in risk. For almost every state that has enacted an extreme risk protection law, and again, the FRO that Illinois has is its version of an extreme risk protection law. The words at risk are used. Those are statutorily defined. And as a lawyer, I'm not going to bore you with this, and I certainly can't remember off the top of my head, but essentially what it is evidence of imminent, meaning, concrete danger to that person or others. And the kinds of things that courts, including in Illinois, would look to are evidence of statements, including in writing, including online, and statements of others with respect to that person's danger, imminent danger, usually to themselves or others, because of the presence of a firearm. And that's the kind of information the court would consider before issuing an order to remove guns.
Thank you. Anyone else on the term at risk or in risk? I'm going to shout out our League of Women Voters of Illinois gun violence prevention issue specialist, Jim McGrath, because he's done numerous programs. Hi, Jim, on this topic. He asks, is anything being done to have state, county, and local police add information on FROs to the opening page of their websites? When someone needs a firearm restraining order, they need it now. They shouldn't have to look for how to initiate a firearm restraining order. Any comments on that?
Well, I think, certainly I think people are going to, probably the fastest is still to use phone calls. And I just made a correction. If I've been, I may have been saying family members a few times. There is a very specific definition of that I just put into the chat. It does include people who have children in common. What's kind of interesting is that former dating relationships are actually not included right now. But if you are in a former dating relationship and a FRO issues against your ex, you actually get some notification. But so far, ex-dating individuals and even ex-spouses, I think you have to have the child in common. Anyway, can file. So if I misspoke, I apologize. But I think that's a great point about how quickly people would need access to the FRO. Certainly law enforcement is trained. We have attorneys basically 24/7 to answer law enforcement questions. And we've done our training on how to respond to FRO questions, again, because we assist people, which we're happy to do, but it's new training that we have had to do with respect to the FROs. I think that's a great point about how quickly these things can move up. And the link that I put in is to our website, but I hope that every law enforcement agency would have a FRO button. We have a new website, and I will tell you, it's not as easy as it sounds always just to throw a button up. It actually is structurally kind of tough. But I think that's a great question, a great point.
All right, thank you. And for those who don't see the chat, Eric wrote, when petitioning for FRO, a family member is defined as a spouse, former spouse, person with whom the respondent has a minor child in common, parent, child, stepchild, any other person related by blood or marriage, or a person who shares a common dwelling. And he mentions you should also immediately contact local law enforcement, of course, so that you can't, you need help. This is not something you do on your own. All right, so I got those in the question. Now in the chat, let me see, we had a few different comments. Let's start at the top. A lot of congratulations, by the way. People are very pleased to have you all here this evening. More interest, several questions about the interrupters and how are they trained? How do you choose them? Do you have some specifics as far as, just more details about the training and requirements, and male, female too, that kind of thing.
So I'll preface this by saying that a lot of my work really centers around explaining the philosophy and the methodology to very, very busy Senate and House offices so that they can make the decisions to fund them. So I can't really speak too much to the operations of individual programs, and they are all very different because they have to be hyper local to operate effectively. So I can speak slightly to the Baltimore example. Basically, there's funds from the governor that go to the mayor's office that then subgrants those funds that's commingled funds, including local dollars, that goes to Catholic Charities here in Maryland, that then partners with a hyper-local organization with multiple localized sites across Baltimore that then funds those programs that then do trainings of individuals from those communities that they serve. That's basically how it works. But again, I did want to preface it by saying that much of my work really is federal. So I'm not too close to the operations at the local level, but it is very hyper local, and there is a training component at each different site.
And then I see that you also answered someone who asked about the time it takes people to trust the interrupters. And you said the interrupters usually come from the communities they serve. They are trusted members of those communities, so they are effective. It takes time, but much of the trust is already there. So these are people that have, that are already in the communities, right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay. I see a lot of congratulations. Money, some questions about how would be the best, what is the best, let's see, I can't find, there are too many here. Would putting a big chunk of money, like let's say the whole 750 million you've talked about, toward implementing the existing laws help drive other states to see the value of the firearm restraining arms or the extreme laws? Not that these initiatives can't run parallel, this is from Gail, but more emphasis on making the laws work. So
Right. I'll take that because
I'll take that one.
I covered that $750 million chunk in my presentation. I think both tranches of funding that Congress made available, they viewed as equally important and probably synergistic. Yes, the more evidence that comes out about the experience of states that have enacted extreme risk laws and are doing them to a standard that's a high standard, which is most of them, the more likely it is that other states will adopt those. So I think the principle here at work is Congress wants, and this law that was signed, to incent states to adopt the strongest, most proactive laws that they can. And when they do, they get funds. And that's always, as someone who worked in government, a big incentive for states to do anything. If you're going to pay them money, it's more likely they'll do it than if you don't. Obviously, the other component to this that's quite important is support for states that have enacted these laws to actually educate their citizens about the existence of these laws, because you all know better than most others that often people who are hostile to the work that we're talking about here like to say that states like Illinois and others, but especially Illinois, has been beaten up, that gun laws don't work. Look at Chicago. If I had a nickel or a dime for every time I've heard that, I'd be a very wealthy person. Well, actually, that's completely false, right? What's true is Illinois has very strong laws. They work. They are enforced well. And that's why the Extreme Risk Protection Order, or FRO, in Illinois is a tool that is not necessary every single time as it is in Florida with weaker laws. I mean, that's just evidentiary and true. But the resulting piece of that is also true, which is you can have the best laws in the country, but if they're not enforced well, then it really doesn't matter and it hurts the cause. And that's why this funding, to me and to our movement, is so very critical. And the more folks that we can have in the movement and outside of the movement who work to educate all citizens about the role of these orders in protecting lives, is really the difference between saving lives, truly saving lives, and not. So hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anybody else on that one? I think that was pretty good. And the big one that Jose answered in the Q&A, but we'll do it for everybody. And that's, said, we feel like so many good-hearted people are trying to do the right thing. And you feel that people who have different viewpoints and deep pockets are undermining what we see as good efforts. And Jose answered this by saying that he does work on the excessive influence of money in politics that makes passing legislative change so challenging. So the question asker did not single out any particular organization, nor shall we. But is there any way to engage people who have a different point of view, let's say in general, not speaking about any particular party or any particular organization, who you have to believe have some honest feeling, and to me, I'm guessing it's fear that causes them to put up roadblocks to some of some of these things that you're talking about. I tried not to be political with that statement, try to make it very.
Well, Brady, I want to hear what other people have to say on this, but one of the things that Brady has tried to do in thinking about this as an organization founded by Republicans who are gun owners is understand how to, you can't depoliticize an issue that feels political to many people, but the solutions don't feel political to most people. If you look at the kinds of things that we're talking about, a huge proportion of the American population, whether you're in red or blue states, whether you're Republican or Democrat, male or female, support these kinds of initiatives. What we need to do a better job of is really cutting through the bogeyman that even talking about firearms and the presence in our homes or not presence in our homes provides in America. And I think it's a social norm change issue. That's why Brady started many years ago our End Family Fire campaign to put a word, family fire, to the thing that happens when you have a loaded, unsecured firearm in your home. And I think we need to encourage these conversations about, do you have a gun in the home and how do you store it, and not make it a political issue. And here's what I mean by that. My younger daughter had severe allergies, and whenever she was at someone else's home, I would raise the question with them because I had to, do you have nuts in your home? And I never felt bad about asking that question. My daughter's life was literally on the line. Why should we feel differently about the issue of firearms? And I think it's a very simple thing, but actually a radical reformation. If each of us can facilitate these conversations, you can think about the things that are in the headlines. You can think about tragedies avoided just because we had the conversation. And of course, the follow-up to those kinds of questions, if you have any concern, is how do you store those firearms? Are they safely stored? So I think that is very important, and it's engaging, and it's not polarizing, and it's not pointing fingers at an individual who chooses to have a firearm in the home. So I think that's one step forward, but that's our approach.
I think that pretty much covers it. Judy, did you want to take over from here and finish us all up?
Sure. Just so our panelists and guests know, I do have the closing. I do have someone listening online who actually texted me personally their question. So I'm going to go ahead and share that. Rosemary, I think it was texted to you as well.
Oh, let's see. Let me look here. Oh, okay. You forwarded it to me. Sure.
I did.
You want me to read it? In light of the recent attacks on the Capitol on January 6th and recent state capitals, it'll help if and recent and various state capitals over the last few years, would new laws defining well-regulated militias help reduce gun violence? There's that definition of well-regulated militias. I think
I'll just take a stab at that for a second. We have other folks who can too. Unfortunately, we have a Supreme Court that, despite having gone to law school and apparently read the Second Amendment, have written out the Second Amendment preamble, which has to do with well-regulated militias from the definition at all, that started with the Heller decision a decade ago and has moved forward in the most recent decision that was issued, the Bruin case. So I'm not sure that's the right place to place our emphasis, but it is a big concern, especially going into election cycles and the role of guns in public places where people come to congregate and express their First Amendment rights. And I don't think anyone wants to live in an America where the Second Amendment swallows the first. So where Brady is focusing its efforts anyway, is passing laws in states to ensure gun-free zones, including public places and most particularly polling places, because those who are intent on disrupting and disenfranchising, especially historically disenfranchised communities, including African Americans, from the right to vote, are very focused on that kind of disruption. And we need laws in place in states to ensure swift and firm prosecution as a deterrent for that kind of activity. So that's where we're focused.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, we are, I mean, I think, we're going to have a tragedy. The more and more people disagree, the tragedy. I gave the fender bender example of people getting into disputes. And when you have access to firearms, this risk goes up. But this idea that, Highland Park had a ban on assault weapons and look what happened. Well, there are those of us who think that Lake County should have, Lake County can't ban assault weapons. It's not Lake County's fault under the legislation. If Lake County had banned assault weapons, then an individual has to go farther. If Illinois had banned assault weapons, then an individual has to go further. And people say, well, they're just going to get them illegally. Okay, but you don't only, the peanut example, you don't only ask one time, do you have peanuts? You don't only keep one EpiPen around. You have multiple ways to protect yourselves. We do that constantly. We have so many different things we don't even think about in terms of ways to protect ourselves. And so why would we, have these single points of failures? Well, where a father, can sign an affidavit and then a gun moves to somebody who shouldn't have. Well, the solution for a lot of people is to not have assault weapons, right? The solution is to continue to push these out. And assault weapons were banned for 10 years. The impact from mass shootings went down. But I do want to say, to go back to that political point real quick, it really is a lot of these structural issues. It really is a lack of investment in communities. It really is a lack of investment in treating so many of the problems in our society, and that we have to continue to talk about. And sometimes that's political, but sometimes that's not, right? Like there are so many people, we have a consensus, I think, in Lake County, maybe 90% of people, that we should increase mental health counseling. That's going to have an amazing impact on all types of violence, not just gun violence. So I do think we need to continue to work on the things that we can agree on. And everybody is a lot of people, I guess I should say, know that we need to invest in mental health. A lot of people know we need to invest in substance abuse treatment. But then when you talk about, investing in schools, okay, now I've just gotten a little more political maybe. But I think that we can achieve these things and invest in our community to prevent violence in the long term and in the short term.
Thank you. Well, we said we would run 2 hours, and that's just about how long it's taken. We want to thank all of our panelists for sharing their knowledge this evening. We want to sincerely thank our League of Women Voters Chairman, Linda Bartmus, and the League of Women Voters of Lake County for sponsoring this special event. But most of all, we want to thank each of you for attending. It is always citizens who make the difference on any issue. Margaret Mead was already quoted, and we know that small group of thoughtful citizens can change the world. It's up to each of us to do it together. You see before you the various emails for the panelists who were represented here tonight. Please contact their organization for further information or to hear more answers to your questions. Once again, I want to close thanking everyone for participating this evening. Jose Santos Woss, Director of Justice Reform at Friends Committee on National Legislation, Kris Brown, President of Brady, and Eric Reinhardt, State's Attorney of Lake County, Illinois. The work you're doing is so appreciated across this county, across this state, across this country, and indeed throughout the world. We hope everyone will have a great evening, and thanks to everyone for being involved. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.